Welcome, everybody, to the ongoing nightclub interview series, where my special guest today truly is the renowned and esteemed teacher, Sharon Salzberg. As many of you know, Sharon is an absolute treasure in the world of meditation and one of the original teachers at the heart of the mindfulness revolution in the West. As you'll see, she combines decades of study, practice, and teaching with the most grounded and practical presentation of meditation in our world today. Our conversation was really all about, or mostly about, the recent political upheaval and how we can relate to it. This particular discussion doesn't hold anything back. It gets to the heart of so much of what's actually happening these days. Meditation and spirituality have so much to offer right now. And Sharon, as you'll see, is the perfect person to deliver these insights. Welcome, everybody. Andrew Holacek here, and I am absolutely thrilled to be able to spend the next few minutes with really one of the great leaders of the meditation movement in the Western world, Sharon Salzberg. It's a real honor and delight to be able to spend some time with her. And so, as usual, I will do a very brief, somewhat formal introduction, and then we're just going to jump right into a bunch of really hot current topics. So, Sharon Salzberg is a meditation pioneer and industry leader, a world-renowned teacher, and New York Times best-selling author. As one of the first to bring meditation and mindfulness into mainstream American culture over 45 years ago, her relatable, demystifying approach has inspired generations of meditation teachers and wellness influencers. Sharon is co-founder of the Insight Meditation Society in Bahrain. Is it Bahrain or Bar? I can never...
It's Barry, just
Barry!
Like a guy named Barry.
After all these years, I would know that. Barry, Massachusetts. And the author of 11 books, including the New York Times bestseller, Real Happiness, now in its second edition. Her seminal work, Loving Kindness, and her newest book, Real Change, Mindfulness to Heal Ourselves and the World, released in September of 2020 from Flatiron Books. Sharon's secular modern approach to Buddhist teachings is sought after at schools, conferences, and retreat centers worldwide. And her podcast, The Metta Hour, has amassed over 3 million downloads. So Sharon, really thank you so deeply for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to chat with us. We're thrilled to have you.
Well, it's a great delight to talk to you after all this time of reading about you.
Yeah, same with me. We've crossed in cyberspace and we've shared platforms and community events together, but it's the first time we've really had a chance to connect, and I'm really honored and thrilled to be able to do this with you. So I have to share with you, I had some prepared ideas, which maybe if we have time we can come back to, but in the light of everything that's happened over the last couple of weeks, and also in connection to your marvelous book, which I'm reading and just absolutely loving, the book on Real Change, to me it seems almost disingenuous not to address this kind of colossal elephant in the room, right? Political, social discord and the like. And so one of the ways I want to talk to you about this, Sharon, is, in fact, there's so much kind of subliminal traffic in the meditation world, not so much about being politically correct, but I playfully refer to it as being spiritually correct. That anger doesn't really have a rightful place on the spiritual path, that wrath is almost anti-spiritual. And so in your experience, how are you relating to what has transpired in the last couple of weeks, and how can we aid our listeners? Because I'm getting so many questions, I'm sure, as you are, in terms of how do we relate to this three-ring circus that's going on right now. So let's start with that and see where that takes us.
Sure. Well, there's so many levels to that. I think about a distinction we sometimes try to make in the meditative world between feeling something and being consumed by it, especially to the degree that it's guiding your actions. That's what's motivating the thing you say, the thing you don't say. you hold back from, or the thing you do or you refrain from doing. And they're very different. And so I think sometimes people morph them together in the spiritual world, for example, and think, well, I'm bad because I feel this. I shouldn't feel anger. I shouldn't have this come up. This is the wrong thing. Or in my case, I just celebrated an outrageous anniversary. I've been meditating for 50 years now.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. It's like unbelievable, really. I started January 7th, 1971. And,
oh, wow.
It's spooky. It's like, I don't think of myself that way, like that old, or, that practiced or anything. But anyway, it would be easy for me to say, you've been meditating for 50 years. What's that still doing here?
Right.
And so I think it's really crucial that we allow every feeling the dignity of its own existence. We feel what we feel. The thing about getting lost in anger, getting consumed by anger, is that it's tricky. There's a lot of energy there that's positive, and there's often a lot of courage there. Like we know just from like a meeting or some get together of people, sometimes it's the angriest person in the room that's the most honest. Like, look at that. And everyone else is studiously looking the other way. Like, I don't want to look at that. Right. Let's not bring that up, So, but the downside of it is that, like in the Buddhist psychology, they say anger is like a forest fire, which can burn up its own support. Mm. It can damage us so much if we get consumed by it. And like a forest fire, it might leave us very far from where we want to be. It's like, as much as there's that cutting through energy in the anger, there's also a kind of delusion sometimes. It's like, if you think of the last time you were really, really angry at yourself, however long ago that was, that's not a time where we're likely to think, I did 5 great things that same morning. I said that stupid thing in the meeting. Those 5 great things are gone. And so we may not see options. We may not see resolutions. We may not see a path of action, actually, in the midst of that kind of anger. So the very delicate task is to kind of retrieve the energy of it and that courage without getting sucked into it. Now, this is not easy, but I think it takes a very powerful exploration and a very personal exploration. Like, what do you think the opposite is? Is it being complacent? Is it letting things go? What do you think of love or compassion? Do you think they're weak and sort of sniveling and, obsequious, or do you think they are powerful? And what's your experience of them, actually, let alone what you think? And so if we are willing to do that kind of exploration, I think we may see lots of sources of strength. And that, to sort of go back more directly to your question, is like a lot of what I have been thinking about this last week and a half, for example. I wrote the book Real Change before even the pandemic, and I turned it in. And then once the pandemic hit, the publisher decided to postpone publication. So instead of coming out in June, it was coming out in September. And in that interim period, a friend of mine was reading it to excerpt it, and he said, he liked the book, but he would read the examples and he'd think, that's what made you anxious? Wait till you see what's coming. Wow. And so I went back to the publisher and I said, is it okay if I write a new preface and just sort of try to ground the book in what's happening? And they said, okay. So the most prevalent question I asked myself in that period to be able to write the preface was, what's still true?
Yeah.
In the midst of chaos and disruption and anxiety and grief and, so much loss, like, what's still true? What's intact? What can I count on? What can I rely on? And in the Sanskrit language, the word dharma, which is so often translated as the truth or the nature of things, or sometimes the Buddhist teaching, actually means that which supports us.
That what holds, yeah.
And so I really tried to look deeply at that for myself. Like, what's holding me together, And, like, what's still true? What's intact? And I thought of the saying of the Buddhas, later echoed by Martin Luther King Jr. Hatred will never cease by hatred. Hatred will only cease by love. This is an eternal law. Which I always thought was kind of quirky. Like, this is, the Buddha is like Mr. Impermanence and saying this is an eternal law. But I really do believe that, because I don't think of love as weak or, giving in, or I think of it as extremely radical and powerful and motivating. And so anyway, so like I looked at not the violent photos or videos, but I looked at some of the earlier photos of people screaming in the Capitol, this is my house, it's our house, you can't take it away. And I had asked myself, still true? Hatred will never cease by hatred. Like, still believe that, And I do. I have also thought of, I'm not going to do justice to this, but James Baldwin has a quotation, something like, if you can look underneath the anger, you find the pain.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
And they just looked like really like lost people. And I felt the compassion. On the other hand, I think one of the really difficult things for me in these last 4 years, there have been a couple that sort of relate very much to my own, personal life, especially my earlier life as a child, where there were just a lot of things kept from me as people tried to be kind, and but nonetheless it didn't really work that way. And so first of all, deceit is very, very hard for me, and actions not bearing consequences is very hard for me.
Yeah.
And I think they've been two hallmarks of the last 4 years. And so when I say, hatred does not cease by hatred, I don't mean that people should not have consequences of their actions. And these actions are very severe and frightening. And I think there have to be consequences.
For sure. And, as you well know, in the Tibetan kind of Vajrayana language, anger is part of the Vajra family, right? Which is kind of the alchemical aspect or tantric component of that is this, the clarity, the incisiveness, the sharpness of actually seeing things, Manjushri's blade that can then be used. And there's also, in the four karmas, the four kind of enlightened activities that somewhat ironically do not create karma, pacifying, enriching, magnetizing, and then when nothing else works, the very viable tough love, wrath of destruction. That it has that place. And so I'm not necessarily starting our conversation with espousing these types of approaches, but I think they're incredibly helpful to bring out into the open right off the bat, because Sharon, when I look into my own experience and feel into my own anger, I find it to be one of the most reifying and solidifying of all emotions. That's the massive near enemy that, anger and fear, which are kissing cousins, unfortunately, there's nothing that makes me feel more solid and real. And so, like you, when I see these people screaming and beating, these videos that are just so hard to watch, I find it's also when I work in death and dying that when things are falling apart for all these people that don't have jobs, that are struggling, anger is one of the most reconstituting of all emotions. It can make you feel more real than almost anything else when everything is falling apart. And so I think that understanding, psychospiritual understanding of it, is really important, because otherwise we do meet anger with anger instead of with compassion. And I couldn't agree more with you that really love is the most powerful force in the universe. I mean, parenthetically, as you know, we use it on the path for harnessed under the rubric of devotion for the purposes of awakening altogether. So there's definitely a place for tough love. There's definitely a place for anger in what's happening now. But here's a question that I really want to throw your way in terms of what you just said. How do we help others? And again, I suppose we have to be a little bit careful in terms of what we may not be saying. But when I look at what's happening, we're living in a world of fake news. We're living in an alternate reality. I listened to some of these interviews with the QAnon folks, and it's really chilling what they believe wholeheartedly. How can we, or in fact, can we help people reconnect to reality?
Yeah, that's as we say, that's a tough question. I actually don't know about the how. I think about that a lot, and it's hard. Like going back to James Baldwin's quote, it's hard to look at one's pain. And any meditator knows that. Oh, look at that! Now I've done 50,000 things to avoid this feeling. Look at that! Here it is. And it's difficult. We do it in the context of community, hopefully, or with a very trusting relationship with a guide, with a teacher, or at least a sense of inspiration. So that we don't feel so alone in the face of the suffering that we uncover. And it's not just suffering; we uncover tremendous joy too, and rejoicing, and really, really beautiful things as well. So, how to provide some of that sense of context? It's hard for me to say. All I feel assured of is that my motivation has to be right. Yeah. And like when I sit with anger, which is one of the teachings, in the world of mindfulness, to be able to be with these different feelings in a different way. And the first thing is to kind of pivot, because when we have a very strong emotion going, we tend to be, as you know, fascinated or fixated on the object, on the condition, on the circumstance. We so rarely kind of turn our awareness around. Like, what does anger feel like? What does desire feel like? So sticking with the anger for a moment, like, what does it feel like in my body? And it's like we take an interest in the feeling itself. And then we can watch the anger movie, and we see that, because these feelings are so complex, we see the different strands of things that are going along with the anger, moments of fear, moments of sadness, moments of grief. And almost always, when I've been able to do that, I come to a sense of helplessness, which is like at the core. And then the anger is what I am used to in order to not feel helpless, which is such a terrible feeling. And if I can get there, then I just take some action. It's like that's my commitment. It may be very small, but it's doing something. And, like some of those people that I've read about who were in the Capitol rioting, and they were bankers, music teachers. It was like it wasn't the like totally downtrodden of society, but I would bet anything there's a kind of psychological helplessness that was cooking there. Like feeling so unworthy in a way.
Yeah.
Or being told they were so unworthy for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think those types of extremists really come from extreme states of mind. And I think I couldn't agree more with you, Sharon. I'm reminded of one of the Lojong or mind training slogans when they talk about working with these really high voltage energies. Is what I do is, like you said, is I will drop the object that triggers the energy and take ownership of the energy itself. That kind of just simply by staying with it, I can start to transform it. Staying in the very crucible of my body. And so I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about the role of connectivity that way, that maybe we can help others reconnect to reality by ourselves establishing a deeper connection to our own realities. That maybe from that stands the skillful means for relating to others will become apparent, but again, maybe not. And so what do you see? This may seem somewhat a circuitous way to get to this topic. What is the role of the body in this? In other words, like I was alluding to earlier, staying embodied, having the courage to be in the blast furnace of these conflicting emotions ourselves, making, loving kindness, which you teach so much about. I think it takes tremendous maitri, metta, to actually do even that. And so can you talk to us a little bit about using the body as a crucible for transformation and the wisdom of waking down into the body to stay with these very difficult emotions, relating to them instead of from them?
Not everybody, so readily feels emotions within their body. I think it's almost like a training for many, and that's fine. We do tend to be kind of disembodied, like that quotation from James Joyce that is so
right, Mr.
often
Duffy.
used. Mr. Duffy lived a short distance from his body.
Yeah.
And I've taught walking meditation, for example, to more than one person who could not feel their feet against the ground till they looked down.
Oh, wow.
And it's just habit. It's the way we're conditioned very often. But over time, I think we can learn to feel these different emotions within the body. And it's just useful because there's less judgment, there's less elaboration. It's just more of a direct experience. It's like, oh, this is what it feels like. And we can actually use those different feelings as a feedback system in life. Like I have a friend who describes herself as the kind of person who could never say no. And so at one point in her meditation, she brought up those kinds of scenarios in her mind where she'd be asked to do something and she really didn't have the time, but she couldn't bring herself to say yes. And she felt what was happening in her body. And she recognized there's a certain feeling that actually came in that moment. It was almost a kind of wave of panic in her stomach and like they won't like me anymore, But it was much more emphatic in her body than it was in her thoughts. And she used that so that the next time, say she was at work and somebody asked her that very kind of question, she'd feel that sensation and she'd say, I have to get back to you later about that. It's like she couldn't bring herself to actually say no, but she could buy time and then she could say no.
Oh.
And that's different than sort of having an identification with the feeling like I'm such an angry person. Why am I so angry? I shouldn't be angry after all these years of meditating. I've been in therapy for so long. For God's sake, you wouldn't think I'd be still so angry. No one else is angry. I'm the only person. It's just like on and on. But if we're just feeling it in the body, it's much more direct. I've also read somewhat mixed things, but I like the first thing I read, which was that research was beginning to show that interoception, that awareness of sensation within your body, not just like holding a hot cup of tea or something that's more external, but feeling within your body is a precursor to empathy, which makes sense to me because there is that resonance within. When we look at somebody and we feel empathy, it's not necessarily a cognitive empathy like, oh, I understand. That must be really hard,
Right.
It's that vibratory resonance that is being sensitive to feeling in your body.
Yeah, really connecting, being honest with the truth of your own feelings. And so, very much along these lines is this notion that you were alluding to earlier, Sharon, that the importance of feeling it but not feeding it, relating to the energy without either indulging in it or repressing it. And that's not such an easy thing to do, right? Because, our default mechanisms are one or the other, either one of those, to either run with it and indulge it or to repress it, in which case, of course, then it becomes symptomatic and lashes out. So in your own experience, when you're working in your own practice, what else can you share with us along those lines to deal with not just anger, but the absolute cascade of emotions that's taking place now, and also even as we were talking before we came on air, so to speak. For me, tempering, if that's even an appropriate thing to do, the excitement that I feel with the new administration coming in, and so it's not always kind of negative situations that I think we need to relate to more skillfully, but almost dealing with, the parents of the 8 worldly concerns altogether, skillful relationship to both hope and fear, and the progeny of both of those.
Well, in terms of fear, I go back to saying it's like a training, and I know some people don't like the word training. It's a cultivation, and that's a very hopeful thing in my mind. That there's a path, and that we can practice, and we can learn skills that maybe we didn't grow up learning, and in terms of emotions or feelings, and in terms of everything. And I've often said that my favorite definition of mindfulness came from an article I read in the New York Times many years ago about one of the early pilot programs bringing mindfulness into the classroom. So this was a 4th grade classroom in Oakland, California. And the journalist asked one of the kids, so he's in 4th grade, so let's say he's 9 or 10 years old. They said, "What is mindfulness? What is mindfulness?" And the young boy responded, "Mindfulness means not hitting someone in the mouth. That's what mindfulness means." And I thought, that is a great definition of mindfulness,
That's street level, isn't it?
Because it's exactly what you were describing. It was, first of all, knowing you're feeling angry when you're starting to feel angry, not after you've sent the email, not after you've responded or lashed out. And it also implies exactly really what you were describing, a balanced relationship to the anger. Because if we get overwhelmed by it and identified with it and sort of defined by it, we'll probably hit a lot of people in the mouth, because life can be really difficult. But if we hate it and we fear it and we're ashamed of it and we try to repress it, we get tighter and tighter and tighter, and then we'll explode.
Yeah.
And so it just doesn't work. We talk about mindfulness as a place in the middle where we can connect fully without either getting overwhelmed nor pushing away. And that takes time, and some things, of course, are easier than others, no doubt. But we actually can cultivate that with a lot of kindness toward ourselves. Don't blame yourself for anything that you're feeling. And just practice. It actually makes a difference. Now, hope is a tricky thing, because, of course, that word also can be used differently. Sometimes when we say hope, I think we really do mean attachment. Like, it's going to have to work out in exactly this way, and nothing else will do. Which is a trap, of course, of expectation and then frustration, usually. But I think as distorted and weird a relationship as many of us have to pain, painful sensation in the body, painful emotion, painful situation, we also can have a really kind of weird and distorted relationship to pleasure, or delight, or wonder, or joy, or whatever. Sometimes we're so distracted we don't even take it in. Sometimes we have these impossible standards. Like I often tell the story about a friend of mine in Washington, D.C. many years ago, taking me to this area, the basin, where they have many, many cherry trees that are planted, and when they all bloom, that's cherry blossom season. So she was really determined to get me there, and we got there. And I just thought it was so beautiful, like all these delicate pink blossoms and so many of them. And then my friend said, "Oh no, it's past the peak." And I thought, oh no, I'm having a bad experience. This isn't good enough. And I also think in a time like this, where there's so much suffering, maybe our own, maybe others, it feels wrong to let in the joy. And people often say to me they feel guilty, about that. And yet, I think we have to look at what resilience really means and how we restore ourselves, and what are the consequences of just getting depleted and exhausted. And the joy will counter that. It'll give us some energy and inspiration. And a lot of things I think we cast in the light of selfish, which are really not. They're really about restoring and having resilience.
Yeah, I mean, really beautifully said. One of the reasons I'm harping on this a little bit is because, in the kind of context of your book on real change, Sharon, when I look into my own experience and I look at what has really catalyzed change in me, it is in fact feeling. It's not so much a cognitive or cerebral thing. It's not some philosophical ideology. And even if it was triggered by that, that in and of itself won't do it. I change when I feel things. And so to me, what we're talking about here is completely resonant with your beautiful book, Mindfulness to Heal Ourselves and the World, Real Change. And so to me, real change means real feeling. And I guess the reality of the feeling is what I'm after. You know, what is it that constitutes an authentic connection to ourselves? And therefore, you know, we express towards ourselves what we express to others. And so obviously when we're doing, or maybe not so obviously, when we're doing this work, by connecting deeply to ourselves in this way, we connect to everybody else, because everybody has this kind of internal landscape. So that to me, it's like, and if there are any final comments along this, you know, what else, of course, you have a beautiful entire book on this. What else is integral to true, real change outside of working with feelings in this authentic way?
Well, you know, again, I wrote the book before the pandemic. So then, because my great fear was like, I wrote a completely irrelevant book. Look at that, you know, like, because things were so extreme, and yet, you know, when I look back at it, there's a lot of emphasis on agency, you know, countering that sense of helplessness, and how important I really think it is to do what even seems like a small thing that's right in front of you, instead of thinking it could never be enough, or, you know, it's so meager, and just do it. And it has a chapter on moving from anger to courage. It has a chapter on moving from grief to resilience, and another one on taking in the joy, and then one on equanimity. And it's the same things. Maybe it's eternal. You know, we're always looking at those qualities because they do sustain us, and they transform the nature of our action. And in a very immediate sense, you know, I think we can connect to our feelings when we can also distinguish the feeling from what we might call the add-on. Yeah. You know, I'm the only one who ever feels this, or this is the only thing I ever feel. This is the real me. Yeah. Or what's it going to be like tomorrow? Or will it be even worse? Or, you know, I spent all that money in therapy. Why is that still here? Or, you know, there are lots of things we might just dump on top of the feeling. And if we can distinguish those and relinquish those, then we can come back to what we're feeling. And that's very healthy, whether it's a painful feeling or a pleasant feeling. So that's part of it. And then in response to something you said that really struck me, I always thought it was one of the weirdest things about meditation, in that it looks like it could be the most solitary activity imaginable. Like maybe you sit all alone. Maybe your eyes are closed. But somehow in the very process, I think we do find a profound connection with others. Yeah. And it really brings us to this world of interconnection, which is the truth of things. And it's not sentimental or saccharine, because it is the truth of things. And it has that kind of power of reality, as Bob Thurman would say. You know, it's realistic.
Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us, and a really big thanks to Sharon for taking time out of her extremely busy schedule to share her vast knowledge, kindness, and wisdom with us. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out all the other offerings on Nightclub. There's a lot happening these days. But until next time, pleasant dreams.